Hi everyone, I'm Jack Crawford, and it's time to review Resident Evil 3 by Capcom. So, a bit of a disclaimer first, I had actually never played the Resident Evil series at all before, but I heard a lot of good things about the Resident Evil 1 and 2 remakes, so I gave them a chance and ended up enjoying them quite a bit. In some ways they were basically what I expected, but there's enough good design in there that made them feel surprisingly fresh. They aren't particularly scary games, but the survival elements work well. You have to make lots of interesting resource management decisions. So I wanted to play this Resident Evil 3 remake, and I figured I might as well tell you my thoughts. So just keep in mind, I'm reviewing this not really as a remake, just from my perspective, and when I refer to these games, I'm referring to the remakes only. I haven't played the originals. What impressed me most about 2 was how the police station mirrored the mansion pretty directly. Exploring it, solving puzzles, using your resources carefully, all of that was enjoyable for the same reasons it was in the first game. But right when you start to relax, when you start to get comfortable with the layout of the police station, it adds in Mr. X, this guy who chases you around constantly and adds so much tension. To me, that's the perfect example of a game taking what worked from its predecessor and changing the design to cover its weaknesses and make it directly better. Resident Evil 3, from that perspective, is a big disappointment. It's only somewhat successful carrying forward the ideas from 2, and it's completely unsuccessful adding new, interesting ideas. Before I even started a new game, I was dismayed by the unlimited saves on hardcore difficulty. The limited save system had its flaws, but I liked that it was different from most games, and it created interesting situations that fit into the broader design. But it turns out that even if saves were limited, everything I just described was gone anyway. Resident Evil 3's levels are much more linear. I can count on one hand the times that you can choose between branching paths where one doesn't instantly lead to a dead end. And that's not such a bad thing, necessarily. I mean, I'm down for a Resident Evil game made up of linear sequences, but those sequences have to make up for what was lost in order to add them, and for the most part, they don't. The notable exception is this segment early on, where you're navigating this dark maze, and there's this unique enemy type crawling in all directions. They can take paths that you can't take because of fences, they pop out of holes, it creates a unique type of tension. The rest of the sequences, though, are generally uninspired. There are heavily scripted hold the W key type action sequences. Literally just following the obvious path and watching your character auto-jump over gaps. I stopped feeling any amount of tension from scenes like this a long time ago. I'd rather just watch a cutscene. There are more legitimate action sequences with Nemesis. Like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, Nemesis chases you throughout the game. I like how he's built up much more, he looks very imposing, and I like how he transforms as the game goes on. But the way he's used in gameplay is completely different. With Mr. X, it was all about this feeling of dread that he's going to show up again soon. You hear his footsteps all the time, even though you don't know exactly where he is. It builds this powerful anticipation. Then when he does show up, the police station is so open that it encourages you to turn around and reroute. It fits the design because you're making more tough decisions about where to go and what to do. Nemesis, on the other hand, never stays very long. He seemingly disappears completely, then randomly drops out of the sky in front of you. It's about brief moments of panic rather than overarching dread. Then the level isn't big enough to give you any real options about where to go, and he can catch up to you anyway, so you're encouraged to dodge and attack. Then he's down or disabled for long enough that you can always escape completely and get to your next destination, and he's gone. That emphasis on dodging attacks with perfect timing doesn't work very well here either. Like I said, levels are tiny, there are lots of tight corridors, it's easy to get stuck on some object or get the camera in an awkward position. Even when the tight corridors aren't making things worse, it can be hard to see visual cues to dodge because Nemesis is coming out of a smoke cloud, or because the camera is so close to your character that you can't watch both Nemesis and the other nearby enemy at the same time, or whatever. There's a reason something like Bloodborne has a camera that's pretty far back from the main character. Speaking of which, there's a very hard boss on the higher difficulties that seems heavily Bloodborne inspired. It's kinda close to being good, but it's ruined by a fairly common combo of attacks that, as far as I can tell, will kill you no matter what you do if you get unlucky. A bunch of little things like this add up to sour the experience. The funny thing is, though, these issues could have been greatly mitigated if you could just use items defensively the same way you can in Resident Evil 1 and 2, but for some reason that was removed. So the difficulty ends up coming more from various annoyances like the ones I've mentioned, rather than from limited resources and open-ended exploration. Resident Evil 3 challenged me much less in those departments compared to its predecessors. There are sections that are more like the linear exploration toward the end of Resident Evil 1 and 2. They're alright. It's exciting entering a new area, but that excitement fades pretty quickly because the areas are so small. Also, the puzzles here are very bland. It's always obvious what to do, there's almost no thought involved, it's just a brainless process of doing it. The puzzles in 1 and 2 are kinda goofy, don't get me wrong. It's hard to imagine a justification in the fiction for them existing, but at least they make you use your brain. The files you find are repetitive as well. Resident Evil 2 files had some virus info that was a bit tired after 1, but also lots of new characters and police station and city stuff. 3 has lots of repetitive virus info and some repetitive police station and city stuff. Almost nothing feels fresh. The story similarly retreads old ground. It doesn't reveal many new details about this world, there are no new characters that stood out, except the one that stood out because of how poorly written he was. Seriously, this guy's actions and motivations make no sense at all, and again, I have to clarify, the previous games had B-movie stories, cheesy dialogue, and so on. They're far from the pinnacle of storytelling, but for the most part, it seemed like they at least tried to make sense. Whereas Resident Evil 3 doesn't try at all. It's just lazy. There are also animations and sound effects that come across as lazy, since they're big steps backwards from Resident Evil 2. Pretty much the only aspect that's not disappointing is Masami Ueda's excellent music. Surprisingly, doing additional playthroughs redeemed the game for me just a little bit. There's a records system where you can earn points by doing certain tasks, typical game achievements basically. Then there's the shop system where you can spend your points on items to make future playthroughs easier. This was all off-putting to me in concept because I'm not a fan of achievements, and even at a glance it seems pretty clear the rank system clashes with the shop system. And even after several playthroughs, I'm not sure what the intended player experience was. Getting an S rank on Inferno with items is hilariously easy for what should be the hardest challenge in the game, but without items it seems like it would be ridiculously hard. Yet despite all that, I had a decent time going back through on Nightmare using the Raiden, then again on Inferno using the rocket launcher. These playthroughs were pretty quick and my playstyle changed significantly in a way that kept things fresh. I honestly don't know if anyone put more than a few minutes of thought into the shop, but it created a pretty interesting metagame where I tried to guess what would be the most useful and planned out which records to go for. One record I never did was the one to shoot all the Charlie dolls hidden in the environment. Collectibles like this are in tons of games, it's the type of thing usually I won't even bother to mention, but it's part of this metagame here, so I'm taking the opportunity to say I hate this stuff. At best, you could argue it encourages me to take in the environments more, but really I would say it causes me to take them in less, since I'm hyper-focused looking for this one specific thing, not thinking about anything else. I did a full playthrough on assisted mode just to look for these. I tried so hard that when I took a break, I instinctively started looking around the room for them in real life. And I still missed 3 of them. The experience was somehow both stressful and extremely boring. Even if I had managed to find all of them, it wouldn't have been enjoyable or fulfilling in any way. I would have just felt relief. I realize you can choose to ignore optional collectibles, but the problem is it completely breaks the trust between the player and the designer. You can't give a player a task that's obviously a complete waste of time without making them wonder what else is a waste of time. That's a poisonous mindset for players to have, and it can be avoided just by not putting stuff in your game that everyone knows is a waste of time. I've been pretty harsh about the negatives in this game, so one thing I should say in its favor is I do think it's well paced, in that you're switching back and forth between different types of gameplay so you don't get bored, and yeah, it kept me engaged. But looking back at the experience, it's so forgettable compared to 1 and 2. Only a couple notable parts stand out. It's a mixture of clumsily constructed action sequences and exploration segments that are too linear and don't add anything to the formula. I'm pretty disappointed with this one, and I'm giving Resident Evil 3 a 4 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts on this one. Feel free to yell at me for not playing the original first or something. Check out my other videos if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.